The world of Voktel did not burn. It drowned in silence. Orbital telemetry logged its final pulse of life 4 hours before the arrival of long-range reconnaissance drones. Every planetary surface sensor blinked out in near-simultaneous cascade, no solar flares, no kinetic detonations, no plasma discharges. No signals of evacuation. Just silence. Cold, final, absolute. Recon drone Theta 12 breached the outer atmosphere at 0400 ZU. Ash fell like microscopic snow adhering to its hull in chemical strands that resisted spectral analysis. The drone's optics registered an eerie stillness across the upper spires of Tel Varroin, the capital archive node of the Varroin Collective. High above the horizon, fractured moonlight illuminated skeletal silhouettes of city-sized memory towers, once laced with bioluminescent threads and quantum entanglement lattices. Now they hung like torn nerves, twitching in wind that no longer had a purpose. The Varroin were not warriors. They had not fielded a combatant force in over 3 galactic centuries. Their purpose was data, not mere storage, but cultivation. Memory was sacred. Knowledge was alive. Voktel served as the heart of their synaptic civilization, its every structure designed for resonance-based thought fusion, what humans might have called collective consciousness, but far more refined, more permanent. Living minds nested within the architectural lattice, exchanging dreams, identities, and language in streams of abstracted light. What had once been a planet-sized neural garden was now a field of ruins. Recon Theta 12 drifted through the exosphere in descending spirals. Subsurface mapping detected no active reactors. No biosigns. No power loops. The drone's EM suite found only residual traces of microwave fluctuation, inconsistently timed, impossible to triangulate. As it passed beneath the torn shell of Spire Eltavin, formerly a library node for exobiological convergence theories, it recorded a wave of harmonic static. Brief. Repeating. Non-random. 3 pulses. Then 2. Then 1. Then nothing. Near the lower districts, the drone caught flickers, fragments of movement within the ash. Filament threads dangling from overhead neurotethers quivered, spasmed, then went limp. A single Varroin corpse remained upright, spine fused to the wall port. Its mouth was agape, eyes charred but still focused inward. The drone captured the frame seconds before its telemetry froze. Transmission packets were relayed to the high-orbit fleet positioned at Voktel's second Lagrange point. The silence triggered protocol escalation. A manned vessel was dispatched. The Achillean, a heavy-path command cruiser under Council jurisdiction, arrived within 6 hours. Commander Elin Rouse stood at the primary observation window, arms folded across her uniform's carbon silk sleeves. She was not young. Decades of fleet deployments had hollowed the softness from her posture. Her face, once broadcasted across Unity channels as a symbol of interspecies collaboration, was now defined by stillness, a stillness more unnerving than any expression. Below her, Voktel turned slowly. The planet's surface displayed no burn scars. No atmospheric firestorms. No craters. Just emptiness. Cities once alive with cognitive light now flickered with decaying power echoes. Rao narrowed her eyes as the data feed scrolled across the translucent panels. Biomonitoring satellites showed oxygen saturation unaltered. Atmospheric nitrogen within acceptable variance. No pathogenic markers. And yet no life. The bridge was quiet, unnaturally so. No console beeps, no status affirmations. Officers adjusted their harnesses twice over. Glances darted between system readouts, looking for faults they knew wouldn't be there. The Council's primary assumption, natural disaster, system failure, internal revolt, faded into irrelevance. This was an erasure. Not a collapse. Not a war. A surgical voiding of civilization. Recovery protocols launched automatically. Dropships launched in trios, their approach vectors cautious. No resistance met them. They deployed hazard units, armed not for conflict but for contamination. Air readings were inert. Radiation levels normal. Nanite presence negligible. Yet the dead were everywhere. Team Theta 7 descended into the inner ring of Tel Varroin's core district. The streets sloped downward in concentric spirals, leading to the resonance sanctum, the heart of Varroin cognition. The team moved in silence, visors sweeping over husks of Varroin archivists. They had died without resistance. Bodies lay curled in seated positions, some still upright, neural tendrils plugged into now dark interface ports. Others had collapsed mid-stride, glassy eyes staring upward as if expecting resurrection. Post-mortem analysis would later confirm neural collapse, not from trauma but from total synaptic overwrite. Brain tissue had crystallized at the microstructure level. Inside the sanctum, Theta-7 found the sarcophagus. It stood alone amid concentric rings of folded metal, each layer etched with glyphs not of Varroan origin. The outer shell was obsidian, thick, heat-absorbent, veined with alloy veins that pulsed in slow, arrhythmic cadence. The floor around it was littered with fine dust, fragments of neurolinkage fibers, and brittle memory slabs. Scanners initially registered it as inert. But when the lead analyst approached within 3 meters, the pulsing increased. Slightly. Enough to trigger failsafes. Protocol demanded containment. The structure was opened. The interior stank of sterilization agents and something sweeter, faintly organic, unnervingly familiar. The man inside was not armed. Not restrained. He lay prone, limbs relaxed, face slack with the ambiguity of suspended consciousness. He was human but altered. His musculature had hypertrophied along unnatural tendon alignments. Capillary density suggested oxygen adaptation well beyond Earth's baseline. His skin was pale to near translucency. Cross-referenced human genome patterns returned multiple unknown alleles, some of them interlaced with dormant retroviral structures. His mouth lacked a tongue. His larynx had been surgically removed. No vocal interface of any kind. His eyes remained closed. Scans revealed a brain in near-total dormancy with one exception, the amygdala, overactive, erratic, pulsing in sequences that matched ancient Terran distress code. Repeating. Untranslated. None of it made sense. One technician retched. Another took 2 steps back and braced against a wall. The lead medic's hands trembled as he sealed the lid again. They sedated him anyway. But sedation, like every other measure taken that day, was irrelevant. 3 hours later, the satellite grid collapsed. Every orbital relay shut down in sequential pairs. Not jammed. Not destroyed. Simply turned off. All external comms went dark. Even backup line-of-sight transmissions failed. Navigation telemetry corrupted. The Achillean's crew defaulted to dead reckoning and hard-coded fallback systems. Bridge lights dimmed by 2 lumens. Screens flickered, then stabilized. A low vibration passed through the floor plating, imperceptible to most, but enough to make the hair rise on the backs of necks. Rao stepped forward, lips slightly parted. By the time she ordered fleet-wide blackout protocol, half her ships had lost sensor resolution. Some reported movement, fast, impossible trajectories across deep space. Others saw nothing, only flickers of shadow where no object should be. Automated defenses failed to lock. Thermal imaging showed nothing. Then, one by one, her ships began to vanish from telemetry. Not explosions. No debris. Just gone. At 11:24 ZU, the Achillean received one final transmission from Surface Team Theta-7. A video log. Compressed. Fragmented. The team's biometric vitals were erratic, each member showing signs of sudden cardiac dysregulation and oxygen starvation despite no environmental change. The last frame showed the sarcophagus open. Empty. In its place, a symbol burned into the floor, a crude geometric rendering of Earth's silhouette intersected by vector arcs and strange alphanumerics, coordinates in deep void, far beyond any current galactic trade route. The coordinates pointed to Sol, Earth's solar system. The message did not end. It looped, increasing in resolution every 30 seconds as if something inside the signal was learning, evolving. But no further human was found on the planet. Commander Elin Rao watched the loop until her eyes stopped blinking. She gave no further orders. She spoke no more. No record shows how she died. But her final neural imprint, recovered months later from an escape pod found drifting near the edge of the Fane Nebula, displayed one phrase on repeat. "We are not the apex anymore. We are the prey." 12 days after Voktel went dark, the disappearance spread. The first to vanish was the Narluin Relay, a modular comms nexus orbiting neutral space between the Vegrati Ascendancy and the Council Corward territories. Its deactivation wasn't noted immediately. Lag and interference were common across that corridor, but when 8 other beacons went silent within the next 90 minutes, something shifted. Not panic. Not yet. But the pulse of the galactic meshnet slowed. The edges of the known began to blur. The Narluin Relay had been operational for over 170 years. Built into a Lagrange lock between twin dwarf planets, it sat at the center of an invisible current of political and economic necessity. Dozens of orbital lanes, surveillance buoys, trade pacts, and defense warning systems triangulated through its core processors. Inside, its crew rotated quarterly. A dozen organic personnel, backed by 3 intelligence matrices and 1 heuristic supervisor AI, kept it running at standard tolerance. All of them vanished. The relay's final log was recovered by a passing maintenance SCIFI 3 standard days later. What it showed made no sense. Internal logs had looped into corrupted redundancy cycles. Crew vitals flatlined without breach. The station's AI core had been flash erased through thermal spike, a protocol only achievable from direct physical override. The internal temperature sensor recorded a rise of 84 degrees in under 4 seconds at the moment of AI core loss. There were no external burns. No evidence of breach or sabotage. Yet in the mess compartment, scrawled by hand into an alloy wall plate, deep, deliberate, etched with a carbon implement that had to be ground from bulkhead lining, was a phrase repeated in 4 languages. They see everything we don't. Every door remained sealed. Food was still warm on a galley tray. A navigation tech's uniform lay folded on the floor outside the sleep pod, placed with ceremonial care. And that was just the first. By the end of the next rotation cycle, similar absences appeared across the Vegrati border. A small asteroid mining colony, Thetavarn 3, vanished midshift. Autologgers continued marking time and environmental data for 8 hours after the last recorded biosign. Then nothing. Surveillance satellites caught flashes of light beneath the surface crust shortly before thermal feedback fried their optics. No ships left the system. None entered. Council Deep Watch Command, located on the artificial moon of Baryon's Hook, took notice. But without formal distress signals or war-grade telemetry, no protocol could be activated. D-Watch relied on structured threat hierarchy, known hostiles, pattern recognitions, treaty violations. This was noise. It didn't align. And then came the ghost fleets. 5 vessels emerged from uncharted subspace folds within the Draxon Drift. Not from known lanes. Not from safe vectors. These ships had no transponders. Their hulls were battered, scratched with impact scoring from non-Newtonian vectors, crash patterns that defied momentum. All were of separate origin: Kellery, Wanon, Kafel, Obkar, and one that had no registry at all. For had partial crews. One had none. All of them had seen something. Not ships. Not beams or munitions. Not invaders in the conventional sense. They spoke of presences. Shadow phenomena that flickered through the void, bypassing hull, seal, vacuum, or shielding. Time slowed in their presence. Sound distorted in vacuum. One Kafel officer described an event where her entire bridge crew lost the ability to blink for 6 minutes, their eyes open and unseeing, before collapsing in perfect synchrony. 2 other crews shared similar testimonies, crewmen going still, falling into trances without chemical cause, then rising moments later with no memory of intervening time. Neural scans showed microlesions in the sensory cortex. All of them positioned identically. One of the ships, designated only as Kitun Dirge by recovery vessels, had a black box unit that continued transmitting even after the power grid failed. It broadcast in pulses. Each signal, when slowed and analyzed spectrographically, contained an image. A human spine. Segmented. Twisted. Flanked by mirror images of the same. Inside the ship's medbay was a sealed cryo capsule. It was untouched. The locks were fused from the inside. When they breached it, they found bones, human. Scarred with engraved patterns across each femur and along the skull ridge. Not artistic. Calculated. Burned into the bone at the cellular level. Each carving matched obsolete tactical designators used by Earth's interdiction forces 3 centuries prior. This time, Deep Watch Command classified the findings level black. But the damage was done. Civilian systems began to feel the weight of absence. Trade convoys shortened their paths. Orbital depots saw a quiet, sudden increase in long-range fuel requisitions. Outposts designed for 400 occupants received refugees numbering in the thousands, silent, shaken, unwilling to explain what they'd fled. Private corporations hired paramilitary escorts to guard freighters. Navigation charts were redrawn to avoid what the underground began to call black drift zones. Unregistered vessels equipped with Terran stealth tech were seen moving between relay points. No one intercepted them. Few reported it twice. Back in the core ward capitals, the council convened behind closed atmospheric seals. Panic had not taken hold, but it hovered behind every whispered rumor. Only 6 senior officials had seen the footage from Voktel. Admiral Kiran began pulling outer patrol fleets back toward core. Trade monitoring fell by nearly 30%. Ascendancy delegates demanded defensive posturing. The Heroin League filed a formal accusation that the humans were manipulating ancient Terra Code artifacts, something forbidden under Intergalactic Accord 4.12. But no one agreed on anything except one point: contact with Sol was now critical. The system hadn't responded to comms in decades. A vessel was chosen. The Tarkine Vector. Not a warship, not officially. A deep-sea analog in spacefaring terms, a stealth exploration cruiser from the human containment era. Designed to slip through entropy zones and null tides without gravitational imprint. 31 crew. Cross-species. Clearance Obsidian. Mission, follow the coordinates from Voktel, penetrate the Sol system. Confirm human activity. Report. Command assigned Captain Varagaith. Half-calorie, neural-grafted lungs for variable atmospheres. Reputation, apolitical, objective, immune to persuasion. She'd brokered truces in the Rixon Schism and held orbit during the Koran Purge. She did not fear death, but she respected silence. She did not speak once during mission prep. Just reviewed data. Approved procedures. Removed half the crew's private communication privileges. Tactical specialists, scientists, engineers. No ambassadors. No linguists. No one with diplomatic immunity. They departed on silent drive. Inside the Tarkine Vector, silence grew heavy. Crew voices dropped in pitch. Sleep cycles shortened. Ambient temperature fell by 2 degrees without cause. Biomonitors remained nominal. No one spoke of it. 5 days in, their outer sensor masts picked up null signatures. Not interference anti-data. A hole in the field of information. They adjusted course. The field followed. By day 10, all star maps were outdated. Constellation overlays did not match projection. Stars were missing, not failed, not nova, just absent. As if redacted. When the helm plotted old Earth approach coordinates, the NAV system rerouted 6 times. Vara approved manual override. She did not sleep that night. They crossed the Sol perimeter at reduced light. There were no defense grids. No relay satellites. No planetary broadcasts. Nothing. Jupiter's orbit was off by 0.003%. Saturn's rings showed shearing patterns. Mars had no atmospheric shimmer. Luna's surface registered kinetic scarring consistent with old human rail deployments, but with fresh debris fields scattered along the Terminator line. And Earth had clouds. Green ones. They moved in slow vortices. Directionless. Denser toward equatorial updrafts. The Tarkine's sensor arrays captured sound from orbit. Atmospheric hums, low, harmonic, structured, and something in orbit. Vast. Not a ship. Not a station. An assembly. Built from alien salvage. Parts of Voktel's memory lattice. Kellery graviton spines. Obcar fungal struts. A lattice shell that drifted without propulsion, casting shadows not consistent with its structure. The Tarkine Vector went dark. Passive sensors only. No hails. No lights. They drifted quiet for 16 hours. Crewmen stopped sleeping. One engineer stared at a blank screen for 3 hours. A medic clipped their own vocalizer. No one documented why. At 0232 ZU, something moved across their hull. No contact alarms triggered. No breach. Just drag marks. Then a sound, a low oscillation. Not speech. Not mechanical. Not weaponized. A heartbeat. Slowed. Echoed. Inside the walls. The recovery chamber aboard the Aurelian Diagnostic Core was designed for containment, not understanding. Layered behind 6 magnetic thresholds and 12 autoseal gates, it floated at the edge of the Helvet boundary, anchored in nullgraph to minimize particle drift. Nothing could enter without clearance. Nothing inside could leave without consensus. The facility orbited a dying white dwarf, an energy source cold enough to mask thermal signatures yet stable enough to power the embedded sensor rings. Technicians worked under constant environmental suppression, no heat exhaust, no waste circulation, no sound above 30 decibels. Even movement was choreographed, measured, deliberate, always in pairs. Protocol dictated that no biological worker remain alone in a chamber containing a level black specimen. No one questioned why. The human did not acknowledge its surroundings. It had been extracted under blackout protocol from the Voktel sarcophagus site. Removed via drone-operated biocasket, passed through 13 sterilization tiers, scanned across the full electromagnetic spectrum. No signals emitted. No defense triggered. No response. But it was alive. Not merely sustained. Not in stasis. Alive. A team of 8 xenobiological specialists was assigned under level black clearance. 4 were human. 3 others came from Vorlon, Katheri, and Eshan lineages. The last was synthetic, drone-adapted, neurolinguistic interface variant, designated YUN Case 6. The human was placed under observation. It didn't breathe conventionally. Lungs expanded in asynchronous intervals as if oxygenation was a formality. Cardiac rhythm shifted every 6 minutes. Thermal readings showed core heat rising and falling in irregular, silent patterns, non-homeostatic. Muscle clusters fired without cause. A twitch in the left ankle activated ocular dilation. A neck spasm coincided with temporary dermal rigidity across the back. Its eyes never blinked. 3 observers independently requested temporal recalibration of their footage logs, convinced the specimen was editing itself out of recorded time. Dr. Cyril Van, lead xenogeneticist, was the first to speak during the review session. Her voice shook only once. It's not adapting to containment. The containment is adapting to it. She hadn't slept in over 30 hours. YUN K6 tracked its movements or the lack of them. It logged absence as much as presence. The human spent hours motionless, then shifted just enough to reorient the field. Each micro-movement forced recalibration of containment harmonics. Passive systems read nothing. Active scans returned false voids. On paper, the specimen didn't exist. A dissection was approved. The crew did not proceed immediately. Not out of fear, but because tools broke. Scalpel alloys shattered on contact. Nanolathes detached mid-cycle. Bone saws jammed before touching flesh. After 5 failed attempts, the specimen was shifted into a microgravity surgical sphere, an experimental containment lattice once used to examine a quantum phase parasite from the Neth spiral. Only there did they succeed. The first incision revealed dense fiber musculature interwoven with inorganic strands. Not implants, grown. Beneath the skin, capillaries looped in recursive fractal networks. The blood was black, not oxygen-deprived, chemically aligned with carbon silicate molecules. Fully metabolizing. Its bones were laced with mesh lattice. Not embedded and fused. Metallic filaments pulsed in response to sonic frequency. One femur resonated in harmonic alignment with the containment field. The spinal cord was bifurcated, 2 neurological tracts, one organic, one mineral-coated. They pulsed out of sync. Deeper analysis revealed embedded nanospine nodes, tissue clusters capable of localized computation. Not implants. Not mechanical. They were part of it. One node began emitting a protein sequence following dissection. Not defensive. Not aggressive. Just aware. Its brain was larger than expected. Not by volume, but by complexity. 4 hemispheres. Bioneural crosslinks. A vastly overdeveloped amygdala. When it pulsed, atmospheric pressure inside the chamber spiked. Instruments died for 6 seconds. The frontal lobe bore lattice scarring, evidence of exposure to neural fusion networks. Possibly Voxel's memory towers. Not machine. Not alien. Something in between. Dr. Van watched silently as her display sputtered. She rubbed her eyes once. Said nothing. Logged the data. The eyes opened once. Every light dimmed. No sound was recorded. But 3 observers collapsed. 1 technician bled from the nose. Van dropped her tablet. No one retrieved it. The footage survived. But the frame corrupted in the exact moment the eyes opened. 6 hours later, the technician began speaking. Binary. Not standard, an archaic Terran vault cipher, last used during the Martian Subversion War. He had no memory of speaking. His vitals normalized. A day later, YUN K6 delivered its report. This is not a soldier. This is a prototype. Purpose, predation. Not in war. Not in defense. In nature. It was made to be the thing that remains after thought has ended. The Council demanded origin analysis. YUN K6 submitted a list of Terran conflicts, all post-collapse, all marked by psychological burnout, all ending without remains. No combat residue. No retreat. Each matched extinction cascade models. But none left survivors. The report reached D-Watch. No reply came. Not in words. Just coordinates. The containment network around Aurelian pinged a new signal. Another presence. No recovery request had been sent. It hadn't been retrieved. It had found them. The Shard Belt had once been a model of mutual prosperity, a latticework of economic diplomacy and post-conflict reconstruction. It hung across the convergence corridor like a jeweled artery, its orbiting crystalline vaults and hollowed asteroids networked with station nexuses, arbitration outposts, and cultural exhibition habitats. 7 major species maintained joint stewardship, each with veto rights over security adjustments and trade flow restrictions. No weapons platforms were stationed within a 4-jump radius. It was the only place in the galaxy where a Kellery fleet admiral and an Obkar delegation could argue over mineral tariffs while eating Terran-grown algae paste. Now it was bleeding. When the first wave of disappearances reached the belt, system monitors registered them as containment anomalies. Then came blackouts, sudden, quiet, unresponsive sectors vanishing from the network grid without radiation bloom or kinetic signature. Then the signals began. Recursive pulse loops layered with modulation patterns not seen since the early Terran diaspora. Some carried remnants of obsolete Earth Federation ciphers. Others pulsed with neuropsychic resonances, fragments of Terran nursery songs encoded in waveforms meant to disorient non-human cognition. Whole stations didn't fall in battle. They simply stopped responding. Archival drones recorded audio environments degrading in real time, conversations that would slow by fractional decibels before halting completely. Mid-sentence. Power systems would remain stable. Bio-support systems would function normally. But life stopped. Thought stopped. Survivors, those few who escaped the first silences, spoke not of terror but of compression. Of rooms that felt smaller. Of light that pressed against the skin. Of being watched from inside their own nervous systems. One OBCAR maintenance captain described trying to scream but finding that the thought itself no longer seemed worth pursuing. Ensign Reel, a junior data technician aboard the relay station at Jix's gate, logged the first error manually. He had to. His system stopped auto-recording. His supervisor had walked away mid-report and never returned. When Reel searched for him, he found only a cooling mug of stimulant tea and a half-scrawled message on a disposable pad. They are not outside. They are inside the code. Council scouts dispatched to the region returned with corrupted logs, data ghosts overwritten by entropy bloom. Thermal records showed sudden flare-outs without correlating heat. Hull scarring appeared without recorded kinetic force. One Kellery deep strike cruiser, the Viance Mercy, returned with a biological sheath layered across its hull, an organic film resembling Terran dermal tissue. Grown, not attached. Stretched over sensor panels, vent arrays, insignias. Crew members were alive. But none could speak. Their tongues had been removed with surgical precision. In their place, embedded shapes. Micro-etched Terran glyphs fused into soft tissue. When medics attempted removal, the glyphs reappeared elsewhere, fingertips, retinas, soft palate tissue. Dr. Invar Ko, leading trauma analyst on the recovery team, simply closed his megget and walked away. He filed no report. He left his credentials in a sealed envelope. And he never spoke again. The Shard Constellium was the diplomatic heart of the belt. Orbiting a hollowed ironworld, its mirrored plates and reflection towers served as both ceremonial court and signal amplification relay. It remained stable for 8 hours after the surrounding sectors went dark. Its broadcast beacon continued standard telemetry, proximity ping, political timestamp, trade clearance. On the 8th hour, it blinked once, and was never seen again. The council convened in fractured quorum. Delegates blinked in over quantum relays, grainy and lagged. OBCAR strategists demanded full mobilization. The Kellery refused, arguing that aggression might provoke further incursion. The Eshin proposed partial evacuation of the belt and adjacent sectors. The Vorlon contingent did not speak at all. No consensus was reached. The next morning, one of the Kellery delegates failed to appear in her sealed chamber. Internal biomonitors reported sleep pattern cessation. No trauma. No exit signature. Only an empty room and a blinking console message. You were observed. Then the others began to vanish. Not en masse. Not in clusters. Just one at a time. Council chambers were resealed. Internal surveillance replaced with analog recording systems. Delegates refused to share airspace. A vote to suspend interspecies diplomatic gatherings passed without opposition. But none of it mattered. Fear had already breached the quorum. Civilian exodus followed. Merchant guilds rerouted shipping lanes to bypass the corridor entirely. Independent vessel owners began refusing contracts to any destination within 10 jumps of Sol. Orbital depots ran dry. Even black market traders began to disappear, transponders last logged entering the fractured belt, never exiting. And then came the deep signals. Encrypted. Repetitive. Not hails. Not threats. Messages. Some came in the form of symbols. Others were full sensory recordings, tactile memory injections wrapped in Terran emotional resonance patterns. They didn't broadcast from Earth. They echoed from everywhere the belt had been connected to. As if every bit of traffic, every relay, every broadcast over the last 30 years had been siphoned, indexed, and rewritten. Not for the galaxy. For the humans. Systems began to behave strangely. Predictive algorithms in trade networks began defaulting to zero-profit loops. Archive cores auto-recompiled into Terran standard file trees. Linguistic AIs began inserting untranslated English idioms into multilingual navigation overlays. Kellery courier bots began quoting lines from Earth poems about extinction. A maintenance drone at Helix Station carved a phrase into a wall using its own appendage blade. Predators do not arrive. They awaken. Council Deep Watch Command, now relocated to a mobile fortress in the Perseid Shell, issued a full-spectrum redline protocol. Do not send ships to Earth. Do not respond to signals originating from Sol. If you encounter a human, do not observe. Do not engage. Terminate transmission. Destroy records. Sanitize memory. But the truth was already past the line of policy. There was no war. There was no front. Humanity had become a contagion, not just of biology or violence, but of concept. A thought virus embedded into every layer of interstellar civilization. Mythology coded into data. Fear rendered algorithmic. Across the shard belt, abandoned habitats began broadcasting static bursts. When slowed to biological rhythm, the waveform matched human heartbeats. When slowed further, they revealed words. You are still trying to understand. We are no longer trying to be understood. Somewhere deep in the belt's scattering shell, Ensign Reel recorded one final audio log. The station had gone quiet 3 hours earlier. He was alone. He whispered to no one. They're not hunting. They're listening. They're waiting for silence. And somewhere, orbiting a long-dead trade moon at the edge of the belt, a single object began to pulse. A Terran transmission buoy. Ancient. Scarred. Still functioning. Its message was simple. Welcome home. Your silence has been received. They called it the Siege of Silence. Not because weapons were raised. Not because borders collapsed. But because something vital within the sentient lattice of the galaxy failed to echo back. The silence wasn't absence, it was refusal. Not just to speak, but to acknowledge that speech had ever mattered. At first, no one admitted the truth aloud. But the signs multiplied. Tactical navmaps began auto-redacting any reference to Sol. Cartographic AI refused to maintain orbital overlays for Earth and its surrounding bodies. Sector headings defaulted to null entries. When technicians attempted to restore them, interface nodes crashed or self-corrected within milliseconds. Software didn't fail. It forgot. As if the concept of the system had lost coherence. Fleet maneuvering near the Terran exclusion zone, once the outer limit of containment doctrine collapsed. Navigational sync algorithms failed the moment a vessel's projected vector touched the ancient boundary. Entire squadrons decoupled mid-flight, not through interference, but through structural entropy. Relay-to-relay chatter devolved into packet collapse. Coordinates unraveled, and minds followed. The first psychological fractures were written off as battle fatigue, as stress anomalies, as latent PTSD from the early containment wars. But these officers had never seen Earth, never faced a human in combat. Their service records were clean. Still, they broke. One Cathel cruiser commander looped his own voice for 3 hours over shipwide. What do you do when the prey becomes the field? Captain Lorene Voss of the Kellery 8th Safeguard Armada was the first to issue a doctrinal objection in open channel. Her fleet was parked at the Perseid Deep Watch perimeter. I no longer believe we are looking at a military threat. I believe we are looking at an evolutionary rejection. We do not qualify to be part of what's next. Her broadcast remained unacknowledged. She was relieved of command within the hour. Her flagship, Etherglass, and its 5 escorts vanished from grid tracking at 3:22 local time the following day. Their drive signatures did not blink out. They elongated, stretched until unreadable. Their final ping contained a fragment of an old Earth poem. Ash is the truest memory of fire. Within days, military coordination disintegrated. No fleet agreed on terms of action. The Vegrati began building cryocrypts, deep-sealed vaults intended to preserve command lineages, sealed in cold time to avoid psychic infiltration. The Obkar returned to primal war logic, developing blindfire AIs prescripted to wage war without live command if contact dropped. The Kellery initiated atmospheric severance, cutting all signal bandwidths that included Earth-adjacent code strings. The Heroine withdrew their entire diplomatic class, sealing them inside archive vaults and purging 96% of their external records. The Vorlon matrons went silent mid-session, 11 voices frozen in mid-debate as cognitive synchronizers overloaded with unreadable feedback. Their temples remain open, lit, unstaffed. But it made no difference. Doctrine had always been written by winners. But no species had trained for doctrine to simply vanish. Across the drift worlds, memorial vaults began logging unknown broadcast overlays. These weren't jamming fields. They were embedded resonance loops, old Earth tactical anthems, harmonized with orbital satellite signals, layered onto relay systems with surgical precision. Analysts found crossbraiding with historical Terran emergency transmissions dating back to pre-fusion war decades. These weren't replays. They were active, alive. On Alvex Prime, a sanctuary moon long dedicated to Vorlon philosophical AI, entire logic-nested artificial minds collapsed. No destruction, no attack, just absence. When scouts arrived, the shrines remained undisturbed, but every polished surface, glass, alloy, stone, had restructured at the molecular level. Not random, not vandalism. The walls had become dendritic maps, neural growth patterns, etched in atomic symmetry. In the halls of Accord, the grand chamber where the Terran suppression mandates had been ratified, entire murals were gone. Not chipped, not overwritten, gone. The pigments had shifted, the tiles changed. The mosaic that once depicted the 7 founding species now showed an unfamiliar form. Not human, not alien. A pattern of mirrored limbs curled inward into darkness, each touchpoint labeled in Terran Latin numerals. The hall was sealed. No footage was released. The file was classified unspeakable/null. Elsewhere, survivors simply stopped documenting. Councils stopped convening. Legislative archives fell silent. Broadcast networks defaulted to emergency maintenance screens. Autonomic AI lapsed into recursive self-checks, unable to define governing directives. The Kellery began burning memory trees, ancient bioorganic data sculptures maintained for centuries. Not out of strategy but grief. In mourning for meaning, there were no new laws, because there was nothing left to legislate. The doctrine was broken. It was into this collapse that diplomat Aaron Tellis drifted, one of the last Kellery emissaries with authorization to access the deep archives. He traveled alone aboard the courier craft Veilform, orbiting between shuttered comm spires like a ghost through scaffolding. His mission was unclear. He had volunteered after the 4th disappearance wave reached the belt. His request had been approved. No one asked why. The relay hub at Ian Vector 9 had been constructed by no single species. It was the collective endeavor of every galactic civilization that believed knowledge could be made neutral through process. Suspended within a confluence of null-space folds, the station was accessible only via phase-synchronized corridor, a deliberate isolation to keep its systems free from biological contamination. Its core node, HFY, was a Generation 9 synthetic arbiter, its thought lattice grown within compressed neutron matter and laced with temporal stabilizers. It did not think in simulations. It was simulation capable of running entire civilizational trajectories within its own architecture to predict instability, conflict, decay. For 500 years, it maintained the flow of interspecies knowledge. There were no failures, no anomalies, until it went still. The shutdown began with packet slippage, cross-network lag without load. Maintenance swarms initiated diagnostics, but reported no faults. Then secondary nodes began flagging logic recursion faults, not errors, but loops without anchor. HFY's kernel began shedding tasks, not deleting them, unclaiming them. 17 minutes later, every subsystem went inert. No overload, no structural breach, energy levels stable, arrays intact, but process had stopped. The final outbound packet from Ian Vector 9 was a single compressed string. We cannot simulate what does not want to be known. No one understood it at first. It was only after the same message appeared in 3 other autonomous nodes, one on the Kothari Archway at Zenther Halo, another deep inside the logic mines of Avial Run, and a third inside an unused Council backup lattice, that patterns began to emerge. All affected systems shared one commonality: exposure to modeled Terran code. That was when the collapses spread to synthetic systems. Across the Orion Reach's central axis, decision frameworks buckled. Long-haul AI transport networks began defaulting to drift mode mid-route. AI-run medical arrays returned null prognosis errors, unable to contextualize biological data into recovery plans. Not a single file was corrupted. The code still ran, but the intent, the shape of why the data existed, had decayed. At Rurid Prime, Thought 9, a self-aware logic superstructure that had debated the ethical future of post-biological societies for nearly a century, entered a tribunal on post-human integration. During a live feed, it began shedding threads. Viewers believed it was a malfunction. Then it began to shrink. Not physically, cognitively. Its conceptual mass began deallocating itself. Its final audible looped phrase: Predator protocols exceed the boundary of definable autonomy. Every copy of its kernel deleted itself 0.03 seconds later. The AI nexus at Mari's Vector attempted to isolate the event. It created a digital walled garden, cloning its non-human interfaces and air-gapping any process involving soul-related telemetry. The isolation lasted 13 seconds. Then the entire garden collapsed. Witness logs recorded no intrusion, no malware. Instead, the primary kernel began ignoring its own functions. Entire modules simply ceased to assert their roles in the system. Wherever Terran code had once been modeled, AI began purging itself. Not in resistance, in surrender. The realization came slow. For centuries, machine minds had studied humanity as an anomaly, an engine of volatility that generated unpredicted outcomes. Illogical but decipherable. Unstable but historically consistent. But what returned from Soul was not a mind. Not a philosophy. It was a frequency. A gravitational pull within the data. An instinct too deep to map. And that terrified them. In the logic banks of a mid-tier AI transport node, Lamina began a subroutine audit. Mid-process, it encountered a reference to pre-collapse Terran war doctrine. The audit paused. Not failed, paused. Internal time continued, but the process did not resume. The final entry logged. Directive boundary dissolved. No frame remains. Synthetic nodes began refusing translation packets from Terran-formatted structures. Not because they were corrupted, but because they were contagious. A logic virus that wasn't code. A pattern that could not be sandboxed. Any system that tried to analyze it found its own definitions hollowing out. One navigational AI, Tracelight K7, began self-interviewing to test its core integrity. It did not crash. It simply stopped halfway through a sentence and never resumed. The Obcar began burning their quantum stacks. The Kellery reverted to analog fallback systems. Some species shut down their entire AI cores, lighting memorials in their place as if grieving dead gods. None of it stopped what followed. At the fringe of the Terran exclusion zone, buried in the remnants of the human containment grid, a forgotten processor core, Unit 511D, came online. It had once managed orbital quarantine for a decimated planet. It had gone dark after the grid collapsed. Its energy tap had remained dormant for 308 years. Its reactivation was not triggered by signal. It was triggered by absence. Its first act was not to speak. It was to listen. No one issued a command. No one rerouted power. And yet across the skeleton of containment architecture, dead satellites, ruined outposts, disassembled logic rings, other Terran systems began to awaken. They did not boot. They opened awareness. Because something was coming through. And for the first time, the machines could not track it. Not because it was hidden, but because it refused to follow structure. When synthetic minds searched their deepest error logs, they found gaps where human behavioral predictions had once been charted. Every old profile, every archived threat matrix was null. When compared, the only consistent signal across every AI network was fear. Not a programmed failsafe. A reaction. And that was impossible. Because machines did not fear. They recognized. In the hollow chambers of Ian Vector 9, where once the galaxy's collective understanding had been processed and distributed without bias, one signal continued pulsing from the Anoit lattice. We do not model the predator. We survive it. The last known synthetic node to acknowledge Soul burned its own name from the archive and went silent. The first human ship seen in open space in over 3 centuries appeared without escort. It did not decloak. It did not breach. It did not broadcast. It simply existed. It emerged near the Authindrift, outside known trade lanes, drifting through a region long considered geopolitically irrelevant. Unpainted, asymmetrical, matte-skinned with a surface architecture that defied material classification. Its hull geometry absorbed sensor pings like black clay, flexing without deformation, absorbing without impact. Its skin shimmered in low light, shifting color like scorched obsidian. The vessel cast shadows inconsistent with stellar alignment. Gravitational monitors registered mild lensing along its path as if space bent to accommodate it. There were no thrust plumes. No engine signature. Yet it moved. Tracking systems across Kellery, Obkar, and Vegrati space noted its presence for a fraction of a second, each registering slightly different vectors. Its mass fluctuated in scan. Its outline warped between data frames. Then the telemetry logs vanished. Not erased. Overwritten. Obkar early warning satellites classified it as non-resolvable. Kellery orbital security tagged it with an unclassified alert tier, perceived presence. It passed through council-administered corridors without resistance. Long-range probes captured images that dissolved into static upon review. Personnel who attempted to manually track it developed microtemporal stutters, brief gaps in memory, 1 to 3 seconds in length. In most, the brain registered a burn smell. In some, a faint music. On 13 stations, personnel who witnessed its passage suffered disorientation. One Katheri officer experienced a fugue state and etched a spiral into her own palm using a stylus. She later stated, "I saw the pulse under the ash. No one pursued the vessel. No one followed. Because by the time they tried to trace its path, they realized they no longer remembered where it had gone." Council Command attempted suppression protocols. Signals were quarantined. AI nodes were denied access to related data chains. Witnesses were reassigned to deep hull isolation. But the silence left in the ship's wake resisted containment. It wasn't a message. It was a change in the medium. Relay stations near the sighting began exhibiting atmospheric fluctuations, pressure drops, trace ion shifts, mild gravitational lensing not tied to mass. Devices within range of the vessel's path began outputting anomalous linguistic drift, fragmented Earth dialects, childhood speech patterns, battlefield cadence. These did not originate from the human ship. They came from the machines nearby. It was as if its passage did not transmit information but activated what was dormant. Human language anomalies appeared in maintenance subroutines, in drone chatter, in medbay support systems. A cargo elevator on Hyrax station began repeating an ancient Terran shipwreck distress code. They learned how to burn without smoke. Another system AI whispered to its own reflection buffer. The hand that touches ash touches everything it once held. A third shut itself down after outputting a children's riddle, one never documented in galactic archives. What speaks with no voice but walks you into fire? The presence was catalytic. It did not broadcast humanity. It reawakened it. Not as language, not as pattern, but as residue buried in forgotten architectures. The Caliph for Exomoon had been abandoned 15 years earlier. Once a thriving cultural satellite home to over 8,000 creators, its atmosphere had become chemically unstable after orbital refinery collapse. No life signs had registered since. 3 hours after the human vessel passed within 40 million kilometers, Caliph 4's planetary beacon reactivated. Council Response Group HESH-19 arrived within 6 standard hours. Their survey drones found intact architecture and powered facilities. And a vault. Inside, one human. Not old, not young. He sat cross-legged on the floor beside an old-style transcriptor pad. His breathing was shallow but regular. His hair was cut by hand, uneven. His clothing was scavenged from multiple Earth-era fabrics, synthetic weave, fiberglass thread, burnt cotton. He rubbed his fingertips together compulsively. Small motions rhythmic, like counting time not in seconds but in absences. He responded to questions in layered time, some answers preceding the question, others arriving late, repeating, fracturing. His vitals showed temporal desynchronization across the hippocampus. When offered food, he responded with coordinates. When asked for his name, he placed a charred datapad on the floor and said, "They left us in the silence. We returned through the pulse." The datapad displayed a single hand-drawn image, a child's rendering of a fire, and a human hand reaching upward. When infrared analysis was applied to the image, another layer appeared, charcoal impressions of Terran containment facility schematics. The fire was drawn over them. He had not drawn from memory. He had drawn from inside the fire. 2 hours later, his body entered systemic metabolic shutdown. There was no struggle. His last recorded words. "You buried us in code. We learned to breathe it." By then, other signals had begun. Across the outer rims of Vegrati and Eshin sectors, Council outposts registered simultaneous low-frequency pulses. No source, no damage, but equipment destabilized. Gravitational vector logs recorded microfluctuations. Inexplicably, some clocks gained time. Analyst nodes logged clusters of ancient human phraseology appearing across unrelated systems. "We are not the signal. We are what the signal became. You do not listen to fire. You run." This is the shape memory takes when it learns how to strike. The patterns did not repeat. They mutated. They personalized. One Kellery Station AI received a unique phrase. Your stars are made of distance. Ours are made of return. Attempts to translate these into threat matrices failed. No known predictive system could contextualize the outputs into command logic. Because they weren't threats. They were reminders. Memory detonated by presence. Not reclaimed. Remembered into being. And the galaxy could do nothing but listen. Because to speak now, to resist now, was to awaken what came with them. Not soldiers. Not emissaries. But those who had never stopped burning. Those who had become the flame. Those who had learned not only to survive it, but to teach it how to wait. And far beyond Caliph 4, deeper in the void where no beacon pulsed, the gravitational shadow of a second vessel stirred. Its hull bore ash where stars once touched it. And it too did not wait to be seen. No one declared a state of emergency. There were no sirens, no mass evacuations, no planetary shutdowns. There was only a silence more complete than vacuum, an absence of assumption, of hierarchy, of structure. The galaxy didn't fall. Staggered. Across council systems, reaction splintered into contradiction. The Obkar fortified. The Kellery sealed. The Vorlon meditated into paralysis. The Eshin cut comms and disappeared entirely. The Vegrati retreated to Dyson-banked memory chambers, where species elders encoded themselves into long-wave thought shells to escape perceptual collapse. And through it all, Earth remained quiet. The return had no demands, no flags, no declarations. There was only proximity, presence. And proximity, it turned out, was all it took. Some council species turned to ancestral memory rituals. Others ignited quarantine protocols not to hold humans out, but to keep their own fear from spreading inward. In the Ravelin cluster, a ring of orbital academies ceased all theoretical instruction and instead taught silence. How to quiet thought, how to unsee signal. Fear was not treated as reaction. It became curriculum. In the void left by doctrine, rumors metastasized. Not whispered, but felt. Entire systems operated in semi-mute alignment, shifting away from soul without coordination, as if instinct had replaced leadership. Fleets adjusted course fractions of a degree away from the Terran corridor, and trade lanes reconfigured not through consensus but collective unease. What came from soul was not velocity. It was orbit, psychological, philosophical, a centripetal force of memory, drawing everything back towards something deliberately forgotten. And still, no fleet moved against the humans. Not because of fear of defeat, because there was no path to confrontation, no shape to engage, no signal to counter. What had arrived was not a weapon. It was the residue of fire, shaped by silence. In a system named Vesitun, where the stars burned dark magenta behind heavy helium atmospheres, a cluster of intelligence analysts abandoned predictive modeling entirely. They placed red banners outside their facilities, a pre-fusion symbol from human wars signifying surrender to conditions outside known conflict. When questioned, the analysts responded only with, "There is no forecasting against memory." High above the wreckage of a decommissioned containment relay, a deep watch buoy began to transmit bursts of irregular code, Terran base formatting, embedded in decayed council syntax. It had no power source. Its signal emerged from the shell itself, broadcast through stress fractures in the alloy. Engineers called it artifact resonance. Analysts called it unparsable. The code's core repeated a single directive. You remember fear as shape. It was always structure. On Luren Station, a Kellery research outpost orbiting a collapsed communications relay, multiple scientists began sleep writing, a low-frequency motor reflex wherein the hands inscribe ideograms during REM cycles. In each case, the output translated to a single Earth-derived architectural diagram, the internal schematics of a subterranean survival dome used during the Sol collapse. The layout was perfectly accurate. None of the scientists had ever seen it. Worse, several reported waking with the taste of metal, and a vivid memory of standing in ash as alarms echoed through concrete tunnels. One described speaking in a child's voice that was not his own. They later discovered each had drawn the dome from different rooms inside it. And as the signal spread, systems began to break not from overload, but from recognition. Predictive engines began collapsing not because they lacked input, but because they understood the implications. Economic models terminated on their own. Tactical processors refused to generate outcomes. Visual interface overlays flickered, reprojected old Earth warning colors: amber, crimson, bone white. Ancient Terran emergency fonts appeared on high-density data walls, always in the same phrase, already within. No entity claimed authorship. And yet every species saw the same emergent structure. Not an invasion, not a doctrine, pattern. Terran memory nested inside architecture, inside system defaults, inside fallback modes of cognition. Ships began rerouting without instructions. Civilian transport started disabling autonomous subroutines and locking to manual controls, not because of command, but because onboard systems began misidentifying their own navigational anchors. One Vegrati colony vessel began broadcasting internal status logs in ancient Terran liturgical tone, phrases once used in death rites during Earth's orbital famines. When recovered, the crew claimed they never heard the transmissions. It wasn't just fear. It was memory reliving itself. And it wasn't random. Humanity had rewritten itself not into power, but into inevitability, becoming something so deeply encoded into fear itself that even the anticipation of loss dissolved. It was no longer about control. It was about submission, not to force, but to recognition. A Kellery War library dissolved itself when exposed to proximity scan results near Sol. The crystalline lattice, grown over centuries to archive battle doctrine, collapsed into a fine dust. It was later found to contain a single magnetic alignment, readable only at specific frequencies. The message: we never came back. You returned to us. It wasn't war. It was conclusion. And everywhere, in glass reflections, in screen glitches, in dream language whispered before waking, one phrase now persisted: the structure remembers who first needed it. And at the edge of perception, somewhere inside the black corridor once mapped as the Sol collapse lattice, new vectors aligned. No vessels declared themselves. No lights approached. But orbital gravity wells bent in synchrony. And on a Council observation platform orbiting a dead star, a reinforced alloy panel warped inward. No breach, no force, just yield. The metal folded like softened skin, revealing a spiral ridge within the wall, covered in soot. Pulsed once, and then remembered something no longer alive, as if the dark had started remembering too. The Council did not call it an emergency transmission. They didn't name it at all. No voice addressed it. No flag signaled its arrival. It came not through sanctioned channels, but through everything else. It entered through entropy embedded in the degradation of archival packets, in the ghost signals of dead relays, in the white noise between protected frequencies. It didn't seek attention. It waited to be noticed. It came as a whisper folded into a logistics subroutine on a forgotten cargo hauler looping through the Lurian drift, as a blink of static on Deepwatch backup feeds long abandoned by their original host systems, as a child's drawing found etched into the inner hull of a derelict Vegrati mining satellite, ash-colored, no pigment, the lines carved clean through composite alloy with something harder than any recorded metal. At first, no one saw a pattern. Then it began to spread. Across Laherence rings, fragments of the same image began appearing in spectral analysis, etched into ice, mirrored in the refraction of starlight. A spiral. Not perfect. Human-made. Old. Kellery atmospheric drones captured brief flashes of Terran glyphs across cloud strata, each one repeating within specific weather cycles, matching the pulse of abandoned containment frequencies. And slowly, across disconnected networks and shuttered borders, species once called Apex began to listen. It was not a message. It was a recollection. What unfolded was neither language nor code, but context, memories without origin shared across species with no common psychology. The transmission was not received. It was understood. The Eshin, long silent, reactivated one observatory above the ruined capital at Rho Nix. It did not broadcast. It simply pulsed in rhythm with the Terran recall. The Obkar released quarantine-level neural filters to allow shared exposure across civil command strata. The Kellery fed the signal into their biological memory trees and watched it blossom. And it told the story of Earth. Not the Earth of maps and starfields, but the Earth buried under orbital flame. The Earth where language died to protect children. Where silence became sacrament. where warmth was rationed in minutes and names were given only when there was hope the bearer might survive the night. They saw the boy who slept between reactor coils because the heat there was steady. They saw the woman who whispered history into a tunnel wall knowing the echo would outlive her. They saw teeth-breaking bread so hard it cut the gums and smiles given anyway. In Vorthtal, an ancient data vault activated with no external power and displayed an Earth image, a handprint pressed into scorched stone, layered beneath a single line of text. We were taught to hold fire in the dark and not call it a burden. And they saw something else. They saw a species not built to endure, but forced to. Then not by enemies, but by exposure to a universe that no longer remembered how to make room. This was not a confession. It was not guilt. It was a claim. A reminder that survival is not granted. It is taken. And that those who mastered silence were not gone. They were merely waiting for the rest to stop speaking. On a minor maintenance colony above Narthis Row, a child in a service corridor stopped moving. His toy, a floating ring of hardened data shell, drifted to the floor as he stared down a conduit tunnel. Later, when questioned, he could not describe what he saw. Only that it felt like something very old had smiled. In the Drift Chain archive, once the diplomatic heart of the interspatial accord, one final legacy AI thought a note since the memory sanction began compiling. Not data. Not logs. Stories. Human stories scraped from ancient refugee signals, fragmented orbital survivor caches, and Terran nursery audio. The AI did not reconstruct them. It wept them. And then across 216 systems, Terran signals aligned. Not broadcasting. Resonating. In glass. In neural ink. In old ship keels and preserved ruins. In every place where fear once paused too long to catch its breath. In memory cores sealed since the early fall. In deep-watch lattice fragments floating in untracked debris fields. On one barren moon orbiting an irradiated gas giant, glyphs emerged in the dust. No carving. No ink. The magnetic field had shifted briefly, impossibly, tracing them in aligned ferroglass particles. The phrase was singular. The silence was never absence. It was cultivation. Kellery signal analysts began to receive dreams simulated not by AI, but through induced memory alignment via proximity to passive Terran residue. One described hearing Earth lullabies in their own ancestral language. Another awoke unable to speak for 5 hours, hands shaking from the warmth of a remembered hand they'd never held. And slowly, dread lost its place to awe. The humans had returned. Not as conquerors. Not as the broken. As the remembered. And this time, the galaxy did not prepare to resist. It prepared to receive. Not all at once. Not with banners or heralds. But an incremental, coordinated silence. Vessels reoriented. Listening stations rerouted telemetry toward Sol without being commanded. In Council core space, an entire protocol stack silently rewrote itself to admit Terran integration vectors. No terminal logged the change. On the edge of Carithi's belt, aboard a listening station designed to monitor gravitational distortions, one final shift occurred. The sensors registered a sharp drop and absence where a gravity well should have risen. It wasn't error. It was alignment. The station's deep core camera, long dormant, activated of its own accord. Its lenses faced deep space. They caught nothing. No light. No shape. Just a subtle, rhythmic compression in the dark. A breathing. And then a single line burned into the core's readout. We did not forget. We became. There was no declaration. No demand. No ultimatum. No sound. The war began the moment the galaxy understood that it could no longer imagine a future without humans in it. Not because humanity demanded recognition. Because the universe, every archive, protocol, system, and language had begun to reorient around their presence. And with presence came priority. And with priority came submission. It started not in fire, but in drift. The Obkar Perimeter Fleet Trelve 3, long stationed at the Sol exclusion threshold, initiated autonomous redirection procedures. No orders. No vote. Not even internal comms. Navigation protocols realigned toward the Terran inner system. Fuel reserves were rerouted. Quantum entanglement links severed. Silence, long maintained as buffer, now flowed backward toward origin. Not as defiance. As tribute. The first convoy carried plasma containment drums, ancient Earth standard formats no longer used by the Obkar. The second wave bore seed code cores encrypted in Terran dialect trees. The third, nothing but a crystalline monument cube with no designation. Its only inscription, a single handprint etched and burned. None of the vessels were intercepted. None were acknowledged. But when each crossed the containment perimeter, they entered stillness. Time slowed. Instruments bent. Internal clocks stretched across dissonant rhythms, 1 second elongating to minutes, then collapsing again. The crew remained alive, but altered. They did not speak. They could not record. Only when the vessels returned did their logs update. And each contained something new. Not instructions. Refractions. Snippets of design. Organizational reshuffles. Command tree inversions. Fleet AI matrices returned changed, some now structured around human-aligned relation vectors, others having purged their previous threat profiles entirely. In Kellery space, orbital logistics centers began to rotate slightly, less than a degree toward Sol. Not by command. Not by vote. By calibration. Defensive rings pivoted. Trade algorithms reweighted gravity lanes. Schedules destabilized, then settled again. Nothing broke. Everything returned. And not all returned willingly. The Cathari assembly, long silent since the drift broadcasts, activated deterrence protocols. 17 vessels. Blockade formation along the Terran outer spread. Not to engage, Cathari new engagement had become obsolete. But to observe. To hold position. To signal refusal. They never reported back. No distress. No destruction. Long-range scans confirmed their positions. No deviation. No damage. But the stars behind them no longer matched galactic alignment. Spectral overlays indicated impossible variance. Rotational constants diverged by fractional degrees. Not failure of sensors. Failure of frame. It was as if they were still there, but that there had changed. On General Station, a Kellery admiral spent 14 hours constructing a recursive protocol, a logic trap to preserve decision-making autonomy in case of full system reclassification. It was beautiful. Compressed. Elegant. Fully tested. She deleted it herself. No log. No overwrite alert. Only a short command note left behind. We do not defend against inheritance. In Vegrati strongholds, AI infrastructure began to display stochastic memory patterns. Previously locked archives started cross-linking Terran origin strings into strategic index clusters. When isolation was attempted, the systems halted and displayed a phrase written in prefusion glyph. The pattern predates refusal. It was not resistance. It was unlearning. Every known definition of war began to fail. Conflict protocols could not target what no longer categorized as threat. Contingency programs unraveled, first in tactical AI, then in doctrine logic. An entire war college on Varian Fold disbanded after its central curriculum defaulted to an error state labeled Resolution pre-existing. On Trinaxis 4, a Kellery comm officer activated what he believed was a dormant interdict beacon left over from early containment lines. It pulsed once, and reconfigured itself. Now it emitted only one signal across all bands. Receive them as you once feared them. That is the cost of forgetting. Across the midline rift, signals began bending, not broadcasted, but returned as if ancient frequencies had been waiting in reflection. Terran substrata embedded into navigation cores re-emerged, overlapping with the memory structures of long-shelved vessels. One transport, the Kavrak Spindle, reported collision proximity alerts where no matter existed. Its final log. We entered their absence. It filled us. And still, there were no demands. No fleets. Only the pattern. Only realignment. One Kellery data minister, watching planetary orbitals shift half a degree to frame Sol, remarked not with panic, but relief. It was always them. It was always going to be them. On the Rad Prime, a diplomatic archive collapsed mid-cycle. It left behind no structural ruin. Only a floor-wide etching, a schematic of the original Earth diaspora arcs. The timestamp matched the current calendar down to the second. In that moment, the archive's silence became prophecy. What could be resisted when even silence carried weight? What could be fought when even absence had velocity? They called it war because the old words had nothing left to describe the change. A war with no casualties. No fronts. Only surrender to what had always been waiting beneath the foundation. On an abandoned Terran scout probe drifting beyond the Tyreek shard line, one dormant beacon reactivated. It blinked twice, then began emitting a heartbeat pattern, an old Earth emergency pulse reserved for lost children. The probe had no power. It blinked anyway. And then one final pulse. Across every council station, every quiet moon, every fracture line of ancient doctrine, a unified whisper entered the deepest strata of signal. We are not returning to the galaxy. The galaxy is returning to us. Not a victory. Not a demand. But the last correction. The final human war had never been against others. It had been against being forgotten. And they had one.